In a world that considers life invaluable up to 13, what happens to the ones that are not considered valuable? That is the question Neal Shusterman's Unwind attempts to answer. As always, format for the book review, summary of the story, what I think's working, what I think didn't work, and my overall thoughts on the book. Full disclosure and heads up about this book, this is intense. This book definitely shocked me at points in a very interesting way because, like I said in the intro, the book covers a super interesting topic that's super dark, but the book does it in such an interesting way that I found it incredibly interesting. I would definitely advise, if you guys aren't a fan of super dark, thought-provoking books like this, steer away from it. If you guys are into books like this, definitely check it out, but if you're not, I totally do not blame you. Our book follows three main characters, Risa, Connor, and Lev, who, after a series of events, started off by Connor, are now on the run from being unwound, and finally discover a society of other unwounds who are working towards the same goal, and Risa, Connor, and Lev join this group and start learning to survive on their own till they turn 18. First thing we're going to talk about for what I think definitely worked in the book is going to be the premise of this book. Now, I absolutely love a dark, thought-provoking story like this. I know this is not most people's type of book, but I absolutely enjoyed it. I love the concept of up until the age of 13, life is considered super valuable, but once you hit 13, then you become expendable, and the book basically details the types of people that people would consider valuable and who's not considered valuable and is expendable to be unwound. That is the entire premise of the book, and I absolutely love how Shusterman writes this, because each of the characters reflects a viewpoint I think people would have if something like this came up in the real world. And I will get into each of the characters individually in a minute, but I absolutely love the premise of this book because it is so dark and thought-provoking in a way that is just super interesting to me. And like I said in the warning earlier, if you guys don't want to read a book like this, I would totally understand. I consider this a really good book with a really good, interesting premise, but most people might not consider this interesting or might get really weirded out by it. So, that's completely up to you. Another thing I think that absolutely worked were the main characters that we focus on. Lev, Risa, and Connor. So I'm gonna go through each character individually because they all work together as a group really well, but I really want to discuss each character individually because each character represents a viewpoint of unwinding that people might have if this actually happened in the world. Connor basically represents those kids that are considered too much trouble. Connor explains that he is very hot-headed, and we see a lot of that early on in the book, especially like in the first couple of chapters. He does something reckless, does not think about the consequences, but because of what he does, it sets the events of the book into motion. And throughout the book, Connor basically learns to slow down and think, and that's basically his arc, basically becoming a leader and someone who doesn't act on instinct all the time, that he thinks before he acts. So I really love Connor as a character because he's in so much pain because his own parents signed the Unwind papers. It is just such a gut punch to Connor and to us when you realize that. Connor's just such an interesting character for what he represents and how well Shusterman is able to write his character. He doesn't go through a huge character arc, but he goes through a very interesting arc throughout the book that is cool to follow. I really enjoy Connor in this book, and I really want to see how he advances as we get into the later books. If you guys have read these books, please do not spoil anything. I want to go in knowing as little as possible so I can be surprised and give you guys my genuine reactions in these videos. So probably my second favorite character in the book is Lev, and Lev is a really interesting character because he's portrayed as what's called a tithe. The tithes are basically chosen to be unwound as like a sacrifice basically, and when we first meet Lev, he's fully on board with being a tithe. Like, he totally believes everything, but as we slowly get through the book and he meets Risa and Connor, he slowly starts to chip away at his belief of being a tithe until he completely throws it away altogether towards the end of the book, where it was a little bit. He's definitely an interesting character to follow because he goes through the most dramatic change, I think, of all three, which is a great change because he goes from believing all of this to completely not caring at all and just wants to see it all burn. But the problem with Lev is we don't see a lot of that change. We hear about it, which I will get to in the section where I talk about what I didn't think worked. But Lev, I think, is a really good character just for what he represents. Probably the character that changed the least in the book is Risa, and Risa basically represents the kids who are pushed out of the foster home state care system and left to fend on their own because they need to make room for more kids to come into the system. That's what she represents. She's a very interesting character when we first meet her, but I think she definitely goes through the least amount of change because when we meet Risa initially in the book is more or less is where she is at the end of the book. She's a very flat character. Now that's not to say that she's a bad character. She's pretty interesting, but she doesn't go through the more interesting character arcs that Lev and Connor go through throughout the book. I enjoyed her character for what she was in the story. I just think she doesn't change quite as much as the other two, which is completely fine. I enjoyed her as a character, but there's just not a whole lot there to interest me. She's initially really interesting, but as the book finishes up, she's pretty much where she started off. And again, that's not to say that she's a bad character. She's pretty well written. Again, Shusterman doesn't give her as much of an arc as the other two. Kicking off with what I think didn't work, this book definitely has a big show don't tell problem, and that is very much shown off in Lev's character arc because Lev, Connor, and Risa are all separated for a while, and during that separation we're following Risa and Connor for the most part. We get a really quick glimpse of what Lev's doing, but for the most part we're following Connor and Risa, and when Lev is reintroduced into the book, he's depicted as like this hardened, jaded kid who has joined a group called the Clappers, who are basically, for lack of a better term, anarchists. Which, that's an interesting arc, considering where Lev started out as fully believing in the unwinding system and all that. I would have loved to have seen how Lev got to that point where he joins the Clappers. That's an arc in and of itself that I really wanted to see. The book is really short, and we're spending most of that time following Connor and Risa and what they're doing, and that's what I mean by this book has a big show don't tell problem. We're reintroduced to Lev as this hardened guy, but we're not shown how he becomes that person. We're just told. And I really wish the book had taken the time to show us how he got to that point. Again, the book's really short, so I get Neal Shusterman has to work within its time frame. This book could have been maybe even 40, 50 pages longer and given us Lev's arc, and I would have been really happy with it to see how he becomes the person we are reintroduced to and who joined the Clappers. That would have been a super satisfying arc for us to follow that would have made Lev a more interesting character overall. Final thoughts on the Unwind here. Honestly, this book shocked me with how dark it got sometimes. Towards the end, there's some visceral stuff that I found super interesting in like a deep philosophical way. This book was so interesting, but in that sort of dark, macabre sort of way that I really enjoy. Overall, I really loved the characters and how Shusterman did a bunch of social commentary through each of the characters and the world itself. I really enjoyed this book for what it was saying and how it said it. I really do recommend this book to anyone who wants to read something like this. Otherwise, if this isn't up your alley, do not feel bad for avoiding it. It's definitely not everyone's taste. So I'm going to be giving Neal Shusterman's Unwind an 8.5 out of 10. If you guys have read the Unwind series or any of the other Unwind books, leave your thoughts about the books in the comments, but please just keep it spoiler free for myself and anyone else who wants to read it. Otherwise, go crazy. If you guys have book recommendations or other types of videos you want to see on the channel, leave those down in the comments. I'm always open to suggestions. If you guys want to check out my social media, my Instagram and TikTok are both RM Book Reviews. I will put links to both of those accounts in the comments, so you guys can go and check those out if you want. I would highly recommend checking out my TikTok because I've been posting a lot of content that isn't up on the channel over there, so go and check that out to see what I've been working on. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. Do not forget, like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you do not miss my next video. Till then, I will see you guys later, and don't forget, keep on reading.